Hi, and welcome to this Fane online event. I'm Lizzie Damilola Blackburn, author of Yinka, Where is Your Husband? And I'm joined by my good friend, Shani Akilah, whose debut short story collection, For Such a Time as This, comes out today.
Yay!
Hi, Shani.
Hi, hey Lizzie.
So, a bit about Shani. So, Shani is a Black British Caribbean writer and screenwriter from South London. She is a book influencer, co-founder of the Nyhah Network, a book club for Black women, and was a literary judge for the Notabene Prize 2023. Shani has a master's degree in African Studies from Oxford University. For Such a Time as This is her debut short story collection. So first of all, I want to say congratulations. You are officially a published author. How does it feel?
Thank you, Lizzie. No, I'm so excited. Like it's literally a dream come true. So it's amazing to kind of be here in this moment. I'm really, really excited.
Yeah, because I remember when we met, it was like, I think 2022, and you slid into my DMs and
Yeah.
you want to know a bit about, my journey as an author. And I think even back then, you didn't even have an agent. So it's amazing to see where you are now. And I'm so proud of you as well.
Lizzie. That means a lot. Thank you.
So shall we kick off?
Yeah, get into it.
So I had the privilege of reading an early advance for such a time as this, and I absolutely fell in love with it. At the time, I was nursing through the night. I'm a first-time mom. And honestly, your book made those constant wake-ins something to look forward to. So thank
Oh,
you. For me, I felt like this short story collection was a love letter to young Black Brits. How would you describe it?
that is so lovely. Someone else said something similar on Book Talk. How would I describe it? I mean, I always kind of introduce it as a short story collection about Black love, friendship, and community during the pandemic years, which focuses on kind of friendship, um, mental health, community, but also just like I guess the nuances of being like a young Black Brit living in London. I would say that the collection deals with a lot of difficult topics, but ultimately is very wholesome. And I think I've always wanted readers to kind of find hope and joy in the stories. And I think yeah, towards the end in particular, there is that that theme of hope in the stories.
Yeah, I like the fact that you used the word wholesome because I did kind of get that sense while I was reading it. And even though, like I said, there were some topics that you touched on that were quite difficult, but I felt like they were very real. And I like the fact that you didn't kind of shy away from like touching
Mhm.
on real issues.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's a great book.
Thank you so much.
So most writers burst into the publishing scene with a novel. What made you want to write a short story collection?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I had some advice um from Bernadine Evaristo actually, who's like a really big mentor advocate for me. She's actually the reason I started writing again properly. But some advice that she gave me was that writing short stories prepares you well to write a novel. And so actually in about 5 years ago, I did a short story course at City Lit. And I think I just really love the form. I really love kind of being able to encapsulate so many things in a kind of short word count. And so I think that's kind of like what put me on the journey of writing short stories. And then during lockdown, the very first story that I wrote, um, which is in this collection, was a short story. And then I just had this vision to write a collection of short stories about Black love during the pandemic and how people were navigating that during lockdown. But then as I kind of went through various experiences, it kind of broadened the scope to not just like love, but also family relationships, friendship, kind of community. But I think I always just had this vision of writing a short story collection rather that was interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool. And let's talk about the themes. So, for such a time as this, explores a wide range of themes so effortlessly and so beautifully, from friendship to romance to mental health to reproductive health. How
Mm.
did you decide which themes you were going to explore and what angle you were going to take?
Yeah, so I think generally I'm really inspired by elements of truth in my own life or things that I see. So the very first story that I had written in this collection is what is now called Love in Crisis. But yeah, like 4 years ago, it was called Love in a Time of Corona. The title actually kind of makes you cringe now because I think it's just crazy. But essentially, it's about a couple that meet on a dating app and they both have the sickle cell trait. And I was basically drawing from my experience of being on Hinge during lockdown, like a lot of me and my friends were. And one of my friends in particular, she has the sickle cell trait and was talking to a guy who had the sickle cell trait also. And so that kind of gave me an idea. And at the same time, I was a youth leader of my local church. And one of the girls I was kind of responsible for had the sickle cell kind of condition. And so I think just doing like life with her, particularly during the pandemic, during like lockdown, I saw how kind of difficult it was. And so I think all of those things kind of gave me inspiration for that first story. But then, like I said, it kind of moved beyond the scope of just like love and dating. One of the stories called Reggie is inspired by my granddad and a trip I took to Jamaica in 2021 to visit him before he died. I've got another story called Good Goodbye, which is inspired by my life as what I call a serial bridesmaid. So I've made 6 times, like in the space of 2 years. And that gave me inspiration for a story. The story in the collection, For Such a Time as This, draws largely from an experience I went through in the workplace. So a lot of it kind of is inspired by my life, but then also there's topics that I felt were important to speak to. So you mentioned women's reproductive health. One of the stories, Blood and Ink, is about a character who has endometriosis. And even though I don't have the condition, I have a lot of friends who do. And it's an issue that affects a lot of Black women in our community. And I'd never really seen that represented in literature before. And so I really wanted to kind of speak to the issue, speak to the importance of the issue and kind of really represent that um, on the page. So I would say generally inspiration kind of comes from my life, but also me wanting to speak to issues that I haven't really seen represented in kind of contemporary Black British literature.
Mhm. And I think the fact that you drew on from your life and your life experiences, I think that's what made the collection come across so real. Like I felt like with each story, I could picture like a friend who'd been through something similar, or there were
Mm,
some stories that I resonated with.
yeah,
And I don't know, I just really loved how real and raw it
yeah.
was.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
So Ghana in December is
Yeah.
a powerful, moving story of a young Black man dealing
Mm,
with immeasurable grief and trauma in the only way he knows how, by keeping it all in. In one instance, his friend says, "I love you, bro," and he can't say it back.
mm,
How do you think Black masculinity in connects with vulnerability? And what do you want Black men to take away from your story?
mm. So I think one of the desires I had for this collection was to really paint like three-dimensional characters. So in Ghana in December, it features a friend called Jonathan, who is like a really good friend to David. And like he said, he says like they're having a very kind of deep conversation. And he shares with him, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but he shares with him like something about his dad. And they've never had that conversation before, despite kind of being friends for nearly a decade. And so I really wanted to depict Jonathan as a really like, I guess, caring friend. Um, but we kind of see another side of him in like Good Goodbye in terms of his relationship with Gabby and like the unraveling of their relationship, although I don't actually go into the reasons why they break up, kind of left it down to the audience to kind of, or the reader to kind of infer what could have happened. Um, but I think I really wanted to draw on a lot of the men in my life. So I have some really great male friends who are really great friends to me. They're really great friends to their male friends, and I kind of really wanted to speak to that. Um, in terms of what I would love people to take away, particularly men, is how being open and being vulnerable in conversation can like lead to really powerful dialogue and healing. I think mental health generally is like a taboo subject, particularly in Black communities, but especially like with Black men. But I'm really hopeful for like a new generation of Black men. Like I see a lot of my friends who are in their like, you know, late 20s, early 30s. I think they're really doing the work in terms of like being better, like emotionally, mentally, like doing therapy, like speaking to each other about the things that they go through. And I kind of really wanted to kind of speak to that in that story.
Yeah, and again, I feel like you did a great job because I don't feel like we see enough of like Black male representation in the publishing industry, and it was just so refreshing to see a Black man, become so soft and to share his emotions and to feel like he's in a safe space.
Yeah,
And it's funny that you mentioned Jonathan because he was in Goodbye, and it was nice to see his growth as well.
yeah,
So the fact that he was the one that kind of like enabled David to kind of like to come out of his shell and to kind of like to open up, but wasn't able to do it with his ex-girlfriend. It was just kind of nice to see that
yeah,
transition.
yeah. No, you're right.
I've been dissecting. So, one of the many unique things about for such a time as this is that some of the stories, as you mentioned, are set during the pandemic. Talk to me about your creative decision behind this, and were you nervous about receiving pushback
Mm,
from your publishers?
yeah. So I think like I said before, I think some of my best stories come from inspiration. And I was writing them in the time that we were in, which was like 2020, 2021, which is the pandemic. And so there's some stories where the pandemic element is crucial to the story. So for such a time as this, it's set like, you know, in 2020, where we had COVID and Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd. Um, and so I think I definitely took a risk because I kind of felt that I was doing something different in terms of writing about a period in history that hasn't yet been represented in the literature. But then I was thinking, okay, there have been so many stories that have been written during World War II, and so many stories continue to be written in that time period. And so I felt like I would be doing something quite new and innovative. And I did know that not everyone would feel the same way. So I did, when I kind of was talking about the collection and I applied to kind of different mentoring programs and development schemes, some of the feedback that I got was that we don't know, like we feel that readers might not like to read stories that are set during the pandemic. But my thing was like how do you know that? Like we've never been through a pandemic before. Like you can't
Exactly.
how people are going to respond. And I think when I was writing the collection, I was really eager for it to kind of like come out as soon as possible. But I think having, you know, like, so it's what, 2024 now. I got my book deal in 2022. I think that kind of 2 year distance kind of allows people to kind of interact with the stories in a different way. Because a lot of the things that we've like forgotten about. And through the editing process, COVID isn't as, it's not as what's the word? It's not as prevalent as it was in earlier drafts. And I think I kind of I needed that distance away from it to kind of look at the stories and think about, okay, what is important here? I think it is unique in terms of it being set during that time period, but it's a very light touch reference now. Um, I think before, particularly like Gone in December. So when I first wrote that story, there was like a whole scene in the airport with like doing like the COVID testing and like the like nasal swab and all this kind of stuff. I had like a really extensive Clubhouse scene. So Clubhouse was an audio based app during like 2020, 2021. So I think I had to like I kind of scaled back the COVID references. So I think they're a lot more like light touch now, which I think makes it stronger because some of the advice or like the feedback I got from my editor was how the strength of the stories is not that they're set in COVID times, but the raw emotion and that the human emotion like that kind of needs to come to the forefront. So yeah, I'm happy with how it is now.
Yeah. Like, yeah, when I finished reading the book, like COVID wasn't the first thing that came to mind. It was more so like you said, the emotions of the characters and what
Yeah,
they went through and the themes it touched on. So
yeah,
I think you and the editor made a good choice.
thank you.
Also, I like the fact that, it's going to be, like you mentioned, it is important to reference important kind of events in history. So there is going to be a time when someone picks up your book years from now and be like, oh, wow, like that's how things were during the
Yeah,
pandemic.
yeah, so true. So in times.
So one of my favorite stories in your collection is Good Goodbye, a
Mm.
beautiful, heartfelt romance on what it's like to have a second chance with the one, only to have fate and a bit of bad luck take it away. Why did you decide not to give Gabby and Jonathan their happily ever after?
I think some readers who've read this story are like really mad with me. Like,
Um,
how did you do that to me? And it's funny because when I first wrote that story, I had two different endings. So I had an end where things work out, and then I had the ending that made it into the book. And I went with the version that is in the collection just because I think it just shows real life, man. Like sometimes things just don't, like you can love a person, you want to be with them, but it's not meant to be. And so I just kind of really wanted to, yeah, just speak to the reality of, I guess, heartbreak and like grief that I guess never leaves you. Um, so yeah, that's kind of why I did it.
What if the one that got away? Because I remember when I read that, I think it was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was nursing, and I messaged you. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you should turn this into a novel. I want to know what happens next." But yeah, I absolutely loved it. I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to give any spoilers. But yeah, it was so beautifully done.
So much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
In a few of the stories, I noticed you chose to write in a second person, you. Talk to me about your reasoning behind this creative decision. What emotions did you want to invoke in your readers?
Mm. So I was kind of first introduced to seeing a book in the second person through reading Open Water by Caleb and Zuma Nelson. And I just think it's honestly one of my favorite books. I just thought it was so beautiful and I really loved how it was written. And so when I wrote what is it called? Uh Not me forgetting my own stories. For such a time as this, um I yeah, experimented with the second person because I felt that it was a very powerful story in terms of the trauma of being a Black person in the workplace during 2020, during Black Lives Matter, during the death of George Floyd. And I think it really, writing in the second person really allows the readers to kind of go on the journey and actually embody the character. And I've spoken to so many people since writing that story, and a lot of people resonate with that story. But even those who didn't go through similar situations in the workplace have also found it really powerful and immersive because I think it is written in the second person. And then I think after that, I just loved it as like a form. And so I just, I think it's weird because I feel like it's the most natural way that I write now, actually. So when
Yeah.
I kind of sit down to write, I feel most comfortable writing in the second person, which is really interesting. So thank you to Caleb for introducing that to me, to like so many readers. But yeah, no, I really like it as a form. I think it is a really it allows the reader to kind of go on a, you know, journey, like an expressive, dynamic journey and actually embody and like become the character, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Oh, shout out to Caleb.
I love it.
So let's talk about For Such a Time as This, which is also, like I said, a short story in the book. So I think you did a fantastic job highlighting some of the injustice and microaggressions Black people sometimes have to deal with when navigating a white majority space.
Mhm.
I sense a great deal of passion and anger from the narrator. How did
Mm.
you personally feel when you were writing this?
Yeah, so I think of all the stories, that story is probably the most personal. Very much was inspired by events that I went through in the workplace in 2020. And it was a very traumatic experience. And I actually, whenever I read that story, I do feel pretty emotional, particularly the last page. Um, but I think for me, writing it was a real act of therapy because I hadn't really had time to like process it. Um, and so yeah, writing it was a way to really process actually what I'd been through. Um, and I think I was able to kind of bring the emotion, like the rage, the disappointment to the page, but then also reflect on how actually all of those experiences culminated in me actually getting a book deal. So
Mhm.
prior to writing that story, um, the collection title was Love in a Time of Corona, which aside from it making me cringe, I think the title would have dated quite a lot. And I think for such a time as this, it reflects a Bible scripture, which is really important to the character as a reference to Esther 4:14, where it says, so what have you been brought into the kingdom for such a time as this? But I also think that title serves a dual purpose because it really reflects the kind of COVID time. It was such a unique period in all of our, like literally the whole world's lives. Like it was a crazy time. And so I think just looking back whilst writing the story was amazing for me to see how something so terrible culminated in me essentially getting a book deal and my work being out in the world. So yeah, it's probably like the most personal, I would say, of all the stories, and it's quite emotional actually when I think about the journey to publication and how something so terrible, something so traumatic, ultimately like turned out for my good. So yeah.
I now want to, commend you for, I guess, putting your emotion and yourself onto the page because I know, as a writer, it's not always easy to be that vulnerable. Um,
Mhm.
but like I said, I feel like it's going to resonate and touch so many Black people who have experienced something similar.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So, as a fellow person of faith, I love how boldly authentic your characters express their spirituality. Talk to me about your decision behind it, and did you have any reservation?
Yeah. So I am a Christian. I've, been brought up in church. Church has been like such an important part of my upbringing, of my childhood, of my adult years. And my experience of reading um kind of characters often in literature is that is very like church is often portrayed in like a can be portrayed in a very negative way. Um, and I also wanted to like write characters who are Christian but are like cool because I feel like sometimes like you can just get Christians and literally just weird like only friends are like the coolest people that they know and they're people of faith and I really wanted to kind of bring that to the page, but then I also wanted to just show the challenges and like the contradictions also of like growing up in church. So in the story of Reggie, Shauna, also Sharna, that really grapples with her faith and has grown up in church, but kind of speaks to the contradictions and the doubts that she has and all of this kind of stuff. And I really wanted to bring that to the narrative as well. But I guess the book is very much an extension of me and my life, and faith is like a big part of my life. And so it was only natural that it kind of entered the page in some kind of way. But I would say it's very like light touch
Mm.
in your face. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I felt like you said, it felt normal.
Yeah.
It didn't feel as if like the character's identity was like being a Christian. It just kind of was something rippling in the background.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
like the fact that, it didn't kind of beat people around the head with it. And yeah, and I think it's, very important to normalize faith in literature to kind of like make sure that all people feel represented. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, well
Thank
done.
you so much.
Shani, as well as being a talented writer, you are also a book influencer.
Mm.
So you read and review books before they come out. How does it feel to be on the other side?
It's so insane. Crazy. Like, I mean, so for years I've like publishers have been sending me advanced copies of books. So it's been so weird just like seeing other book influencers reviewing my book ahead of publication date and just yeah, it's a very surreal moment, but I feel really happy. I feel really blessed. I feel really excited. And yeah, it's just a really surreal moment to see my work out in the world amongst a community of people that I've got to know over the past like 3, 4 years. So yeah, really, really exciting.
And do you read your reviews?
No, which is actually some advice I got from you. People tag me in reviews, then on Instagram and stuff, like I'll read it, but I'm not like going on Goodreads or Storygraph or anything like that. Yeah,
Yeah, protect your mental health.
absolutely.
So let's talk about blood and ink. First of
Mm,
all, I want to applaud you for touching upon endometriosis, a chronic painful condition that affects thousands of women, but it's oftentimes undiagnosed. Can you talk me through your research process into this condition? Please only share what you feel comfortable with.
sure. So growing up, I had like really terrible periods. Um, and it's something that just kind of like runs in my family. Um, but I haven't been diagnosed with endometriosis, but a lot of my friends have been. And even since I've written this story, like I've s- I've seen even more people kind of say, oh my gosh, like this is something that I've been through in terms of the process of being diagnosed for years and like struggles with engaging with mental health, oh, sorry, not mental health, medical professionals. And so I think for me, I don't even know why I even got the idea to write this story. I think I saw a tweet actually in 2020 about someone speaking about how um yeah, like how much of an ordeal it was having endometriosis. And I think I just really wanted to write a story where people felt seen. Um and yeah, I mean, I spoke to like a lot of people. I spoke to a lot of friends who have the condition. I did loads of research. I followed like loads of kind of Black women with endometriosis pages on Instagram and like, watch loads of TikTok videos and stuff. So I did a lot of research, and I guess I was able to draw on, some of the things I've experienced in terms of having like really painful periods and just like missing things and like really important life events and stuff like that. Like I could definitely resonate with that. But I think for me, writing authentic stories is really important. So I always do like a lot of research. I make sure I speak to people. I've got like voice notes, like the length of podcasts from like friends over the the last few years, and just checking things with them. Like, okay, so if this was a scenario, like how would you respond? And so yeah, I think it was really important for me to write a story where Black women felt seen.
Mhm. And again, I want to applaud you for your duty of care because, like you, I know, people who have that condition. So it is a very kind of like touchy subject, but I felt like you done it in a way which was like so sensitive. Um,
Mm, thank you.
and yeah, I feel like a lot of like women are going to resonate with it, but also because I had really bad periods as well. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, do I have endometriosis? And I feel
Mm,
like there'd be a lot of women who might even take the step further to try and get a diagnosis.
yeah, 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 for sure.
So, for such a time as this is rooted in a strong sense of place and setting. In one book, we go from Ghana to Jamaica to the London Underground to Tesco. How did you decide where to set your stories, and did the settings change over time?
Yeah. So I think it just goes back to that point of drawing from my real life experiences. So in 2021, my granddad got sick and I traveled to Jamaica, and literally just I think whenever I'm in Jamaica, I always feel like really inspired. I think there's Jamaica is just amazing. Like in terms of the setting and the place, like it's really easy for me to write stories. And so I actually wrote that story in like 2 days. Um, and so I think I'd always planned to have the story set in London, but going to Jamaica kind of expanded the scope. And then in terms of Ghana in December, a lot of my friends for the so many years now have been going to like do up enjoyment in Ghana at Christmas. And so I really wanted to like speak to that. And so yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a big part of like Black British like millennial culture, like going home. at Christmas, so I really wanted to represent that. But then also I really wanted to show South London, but particularly the side of South London that I don't feel like I've really seen in literature. So a lot of the stories are set or have reference to Woolwich, which is where I'm from. I've got a story on the DLR, which, you know, was a big part of like my life, still is, even though we have the Elizabeth line now, but you know, DLR, real G. Story set in Tesco. So I think I just really wanted to kind of show like the everyday experiences in terms of setting that people could relate to. Because I think when I reflect on my how I like to read as a reader and kind of where the kind of the books I love to read the most is where I feel seen. So I mentioned Open Water earlier. It was really great to like see a story that was set in South London and had reference to Deptford and other places I go to. So I really wanted to kind of add to the body of literature in terms of that regard, but really put another side of South London on the map in terms of contemporary literature.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm originally from South London, Peckham, so you're definitely represented. So, oh, you kind of touched upon this, but you might have more to add. So there is a natural assumption by some readers that the main character in a book is based on its author. Trust me, I get asked, are you Yinka? So obviously your short story collection has multiple characters, but do you resonate with any of your characters? And did you infuse your personality or experience in any of them?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think anyone who knows me who reads this collection will see elements of me in like all of the characters. So like I said, in For Such a Time as This, the story that was very much inspired by real experience, real experiences I went through. So yeah, Niah is definitely a version of me. But even in terms of the male characters, say David and Gone in December and kind of experiencing like seasonal depression, like being here, well, being in the UK in the winter months, that is definitely something I can relate to. I've got kind of light touch references to like being vegan. So I'm veganish, shall we say? Vegan, veganish. I've got Caribbean characters. I'm from Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana, so that's referenced. So I would say, yeah, all of the characters to some extent are inspired by like elements of my personality, elements of my character, but then also the people around me as well. So in Love in Crisis, the younger sister Shalom, I mentioned there's a reference to like having she liked Twix Extra, and that was it's a very specific piece of detail, but my that's basically my sister. She loves Twix Extra. So yeah,
I noticed in Good Goodbye, so is it Gabby?
yeah.
She has brown like nails. And I realized that you tend to have brown nails.
Yeah, so I actually don't at the moment because my nails like
Oh.
it. But yeah, that is
Yeah,
I think I say burgundy nails. I always have burgundy nails.
that's it, yeah.
That was me too.
So for me, for such a time as this, reads like one of those timeless classic albums where any song you play, you're guaranteed to enjoy it. Out of
Mm.
curiosity, were you inspired by any music while you're writing your short story collection? And do you have a playlist?
So I do have a playlist. It was put together by my incredible musician of a friend and musical director, Akil Henry. So
Oh, sorry
yeah.
for
Oh
him
yeah,
as
you
well.
know Akil, yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, it's on Spotify. I posted about it on my Instagram, and so yeah, there's a link which you can find in my bio. Um, so I think in what story is it? So Good Goodbye is actually a song title by Liana Lahavas. She's got a song called Good Goodbye. And yeah, I think I must have been listening to that around the time that I had written that story. And so I thought that was a really great title. Um, Tiny desks are mentioned as well in what's it called? Back to the Office. So there's a character who's listening to Coffee's Tiny Desk on YouTube. And I honestly, that is one of my favorite Tiny Desk concerts. Like I love it so much. It just fills me so much joy. It came out, I think it came out like during the pandemic, and it was just so needed. I also mentioned hers Tiny Desk, which I love as well. So I definitely had to represent in that regard. In for such a time as this, the story, Kendrick Lamar's All Right is mentioned. Um, so the character listens to it on a walk. So yeah, music is like a big part of the collection for sure. And it's really great that I have a playlist now, which is really cool.
Love it. I'm gonna check it out.
Please do.
So there's a natural misconception that writing a short story is easier than writing a novel, but it can be equally hard, if not hard, because you have a smaller word count.
Mm.
What has been the most challenging thing about writing a short story collection, and which story was the hardest to write?
Yeah, really good questions. I think the stories where I used my imagination as opposed to drawing a real life experience, I found the hardest to write. So, Gone in December, I really struggled with that story. It took me like 4 years to get right.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yeah. And I think I finally, so last summer when I was editing, I changed it like quite substantially. But I think because the characters in it are male, I find it more difficult to write male characters than I do female characters. So that was a really hard one. I think Blood and Ink, I also struggled. So I remember it's like last summer slash like autumn. I was struggling for ages and I just took a break from it and then came back to it. And it was actually my friend's wedding and I like left early to like come back and finish that story. I didn't stay for the after party because I was like, I need to get this story like but I struggled. Why did I struggle with that one? I think again, like completely made up story. Um and initially in my original manuscript, the story was set during lockdown. So initially it was set the day that we went into lockdown. But this version it's set in 2021. And there are a few references to lockdown, but the time frame is completely different now, which I think makes it a lot stronger. But I really kind of struggled with that. Yeah, it was really hard. I really struggled with that story, but I think it was worth it because now I actually really like those stories and I didn't beforehand. I actually wanted to take them out of the collection because I didn't.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was fun. And then what other ones did I find difficult to write? Um oh yeah, third death. So that story, I really wanted to write a story that kind of reflected the relationship I have with my grandmother. So my grandmother, she's Guyanese, she's part of the Windrush generation, and I think we just have a really special relationship. Like I'm always speaking to her about my dating chronicles and like experiences with men, and she loves it. She loves the tea. So I really wanted to kind of like write a story that was inspired by that. But again, it was like completely like made up in terms of the journey that the characters kind of go on. And I think 2021, 2022, in our family we experienced like a lot of like bereavements and just a lot of difficult times. But I think having those experiences, the same with Gone in December, made my stories a lot stronger, I think, being able to kind of bring some of those emotions, some of those feelings to the page. But the version that is actually in the collection, The Third Death, was completely different to the version that went out on submission.
Hmm. It's crazy how that happened, like
Mm,
sometimes manuscript can be like night and day.
yeah,
It's for the better.
honestly, yeah. And I think sometimes you kind of need some time away from your manuscript as
Mhm.
well. Because I think I started writing these stories in 2020, 2021, got an agent at 2022, beginning of 2022, got a book deal at the end of 2022. And I hadn't really looked at it until like maybe 7 months later in terms of the edits. But I think having that distance away from it really helped me to make it stronger.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you've mentioned something really important regarding time, because
Mm,
I feel like some people just assume that, short story collection won't take as long compared to a novel. And the fact they took you 4 years to write, one story just shows like you need a lot of patience
yeah,
to get it right.
yeah, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
And how do you want people to feel after reading for such a time as this?
Yeah, I think I want people to feel seen, and I think ultimately I want people to feel like hope and joy. I think all of the stories, or a lot of the stories, kind of touch upon like really challenging topics, challenging times, difficult experiences, whether that's like grief or heartbreak or like mental health challenges, like in family. But I think ultimately I wanted to speak to how in the midst of difficult times, in the midst of trauma, you can find beauty in friendship, you can find beauty in family, you can find like beauty in creation. And so yeah, I think ultimately like I want people to have hope, I would say, and joy, and just like taking time to see the elements of beauty in their own lives, and
Mhm.
yeah, like keep going, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I finished it, I was like, I just had this really warm, fuzzy feeling in my belly, and it just felt very hopeful as well, especially like how you got all the characters to kind of like come together in the end. And even though, it's a tribute to Black people, I think the fact that you kind of touched on a lot of universal themes, I think it will
Yeah,
still resonate with like all people from different backgrounds. Um,
absolutely.
but yeah, it was just such a beautiful, well-written book.
Thank you so much, Lizzie.
Mhm.
Look.
And then lastly, if your book was a menu, what three dishes would it consist of?
That is a good question. I love that
Very random
question.
question.
So I mean, food is a big theme in the collection. So I
Mm,
definitely say roti and chana, which
yes.
is
Ooh.
mentioned in The Third Death. Um, I would have a soy patty on there from Juicy in Jamaica, and then I'd have jollof rice on there because that is
Oh,
mentioned. That is mentioned in one of the stories.
of course.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, thank you, Sean. It's been absolute joy to speak to you, and I am so, so proud of you and so happy for you as well. For such a time as this is out today, do you want to tell people where they can get it?
Yay. So you can now, it's not even a pre-order thing anymore. You
Mhm.
can buy it from Waterstones, from Amazon, support your independent local bookshops as well. I'm a big fan of Round Table Books in Brixton. I think they've got some like signed copies from me. Yeah, so pretty much you should be able to get it in most places. So yeah, but if not, let us know, and we can figure that out.
Cool. Well, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening. See you later. Have a
Thank you
nice
so
day.
much. Take care. Bye.